There is a moment that arrives quietly, not announced, not dramatic, and yet, once it happens, your life is never the same. It doesn't come as a voice. It doesn't arrive as a sign in the sky. It shows up as a feeling you can't explain. You could be doing everything right, following the plan you were given, living the life that looks acceptable from the outside. And then something cracks. You're driving the same road you've driven 1,000 times when a strange weight presses against your chest. Not pain, awareness. Or you're lying awake at night, staring into the dark when a question rises without permission. Is this really my life? Not in a dramatic way, not with panic, just clarity mixed with discomfort. That question doesn't come from your mind. It comes from deeper. And once it appears, it doesn't go away. This is where most people get confused. They think something is wrong with them. They think they're becoming ungrateful, restless, unstable. But what's actually happening is far more precise. Something inside you has begun to wake up, not to give you answers, but to remove your certainty. This is the first phase of a much larger internal shift, a stage so subtle that many people experience it for years without realizing what it is. It begins with dissatisfaction, but not the kind success can fix. You may still laugh, still function, still meet expectations. Yet, underneath it all, something feels borrowed, as if you're living inside a version of life that was handed to you rather than chosen. The things that once motivated you now feel hollow. Conversations that used to entertain you feel repetitive. Achievements lose their flavor faster than they used to. And the strangest part? You can't explain this feeling to anyone without sounding ungrateful or dramatic, so you stop trying. Instead, you distract yourself. More work, more noise, more content, more plans. But the more you fill the amaze space, the louder the silence underneath becomes. This stage doesn't destroy your life. It destabilizes your assumptions. You begin to question ideas you once accepted without resistance. Why am I chasing this? Why does everyone agree this is normal? Why do I feel disconnected even when I'm surrounded by people? These aren't philosophical curiosities. They're internal pressure points. Your mind wants to move forward. Your identity wants to stay safe. And that tension creates unease. You may notice changes in how you relate to people, not hostility, distance. It's not that you think you're better than them. It's that you no longer feel fully present in the same conversations. Surface level talk feels exhausting. Routine complaints feel repetitive. You listen, but something inside you isn't there anymore. At the same time, small moments begin to stand out. Coincidences that feel charged. Books that seem to find you at the right moment. Thoughts you haven't spoken suddenly reflected back to you by strangers, songs, or passing comments. These aren't signs of magic. They're signs of attention. Your awareness is sharpening. You start noticing patterns instead of just events. Emotionally, this stage can feel confusing. You may feel more sensitive to people's moods, to environments, to your own inner reactions. Things that never affected you before now leave an imprint. Your dreams may become vivid, symbolic, strangely emotional. Your inner world is becoming louder because you've spent most of your life ignoring it. But here's the part most people get wrong. This stage is not asking you to escape your life. It's asking you to question the role you're playing inside it. Many people panic here. They mistake the discomfort for failure. They assume they need to fix it quickly, so they double down on productivity. They chase novelty. They suppress the questions. But that doesn't stop the process. It intensifies it. Because once awareness begins, it cannot be undone. Trying to silence it is like trying to hold your breath indefinitely. Eventually, your system forces you to breathe. The discomfort isn't punishment, it's recalibration. This stage exists to loosen your attachment to automatic living, to interrupt the script you've been unconsciously following. And the most important thing to understand right now is this: you are not meant to solve this stage. You are meant to stay present with it. There are no instructions yet, no techniques, no identity to adopt, only honesty. Honesty about what feels empty. Honesty about what no longer fits. Honesty about questions you were never taught to ask. If you rush past this stage, you don't skip pain, you postpone it, because every later transformation depends on how honestly you meet this moment. This is the call, not to belief, not to spirituality, not to answers, but to awareness, a quiet, internal knock asking, are you willing to see your life clearly, even if it means uncertainty? Most people ignore it, not because they are weak, but because comfort is convincing. But if you're listening to this right now, something in you didn't ignore it. You paused, you paid attention, and that alone means the process has already begun. In the next session, we'll explore what happens when this awareness turns into urgency, when the search begins, and why that phase can be just as dangerous as it is necessary. But for now, understand this: nothing is wrong with you. You're not lost. You're standing at the edge of a deeper life, and awareness has just taken its first breath. Once the questions take root, they don't stay quiet for long. What began as a subtle unease in your daily life slowly transforms into urgency. Not curiosity, need. You don't just want answers anymore. You feel like you require them. This is the moment when awareness turns outward, when the inner crack becomes a search. You begin looking everywhere: books, videos, podcasts, teachers, philosophies, ancient wisdom, modern psychology. At first, it feels exhilarating. For the first time in your life, you feel alive in your thinking. Ideas spark something inside you. Concepts feel charged. Language suddenly matters. You start seeing patterns between things that once seemed unrelated. Consciousness, trauma, ego, meaning, identity. Everything feels connected. And the more you learn, the more convinced you become that something important is just one insight away. This stage feels productive, but it's deceptive, because the hunger never ends. No matter how much you consume, there is always another video to watch, another perspective to consider, another teacher with a deeper explanation, and slowly, without realizing it, the search becomes frantic. You're not exploring anymore. You're chasing relief. You want clarity. You want certainty. You want the feeling of being whole again. So you keep consuming. You might meditate one day, journal the next, study philosophy at night, analyze psychology in the morning. You collect ideas like tools, but you never stop long enough to use them. And here's the quiet contradiction of this stage. You're searching for yourself while avoiding yourself. Because as long as you're learning, you don't have to sit still. As long as you're absorbing information, you don't have to feel the deeper discomfort underneath. This stage often creates a subtle identity shift. You begin seeing yourself as someone who knows more, not in an arrogant way, but in a fragile one. You start noticing how unconscious others seem, how shallow conversations feel, how repetitive social norms appear, and while part of this perception is real, part of it is a defense. Knowledge becomes armor. Understanding becomes distance. You may feel compelled to explain insights to others, to share quotes, to recommend books, to point out patterns people aren't seeing. Sometimes this comes from care, sometimes from loneliness, often from both. Because despite all the information, something still isn't settling. In fact, The more you learn, the more fragmented you feel. Different philosophies contradict each other. Different teachers disagree. Different paths claim to be the truth, and your mind, trained to resolve contradictions, can't. You start questioning everything. Is this path right? Is that teacher authentic? Am I doing this wrong? Why don't I feel different yet? The search that once felt exciting now feels exhausting. You may notice something else during this phase. Moments of clarity, followed by collapse. You feel aligned for a few days, then confused again. You feel inspired after a breakthrough, then empty shortly after. It's not because the insights are false. It's because insight alone cannot transform you. This stage is not meant to complete you. It's meant to overwhelm the mind, to push it to its limit, because eventually something has to give, and that something is control. The real danger here isn't confusion, it's getting stuck. Some people remain in this stage for decades, constantly learning, constantly seeking, never arriving. They become experts in ideas, but strangers to themselves. They mistake accumulation for growth, movement for progress, but the truth is simpler and harder. This phase exists to exhaust your reliance on external answers, to show you that no amount of information will resolve what is fundamentally experiential. And when that realization begins to sink in, a shift occurs. Not clarity, collapse. The excitement fades. The teachings lose their emotional impact. Practices that once brought comfort feel mechanical. You begin to wonder, what if none of this works? What if I've been chasing illusions? What if there is no final understanding? This is where many people panic. They assume they've failed the journey. They assume they've lost something, but in reality, this is the threshold. The moment where seeking can no longer protect you from yourself, because the next stage does not begin with answers. It begins with loss of identity, loss of certainty, loss of meaning as you understood it, and the mind resists this more than anything, which is why the next phase feels darker than anything before it. Not because you're moving backward, but because you're moving inward. In the next session, we'll explore the stage most people misunderstand, fear, or try to escape. The phase where the self you've been building begins to dissolve, and why this breakdown is not a mistake, but a necessary crossing. If this video resonates with where you are right now, make sure to subscribe. The next session goes deeper, and it's not a phase you want to walk through without understanding. There comes a point when the search stops, not because you found the answer, but because the one asking the question begins to fall apart. This is not the stage people romanticize. There is no excitement here, no clarity, no sense of progress, only silence where certainty used to live. The ideas that once energized you now feel hollow. The practices that once gave comfort feel distant. The identity you were building, the seeker, the thinker, the one who understands, no longer holds. And what replaces it is not peace, it's absence. You may feel as though you've lost direction, as though something essential has slipped through your fingers. But what's really happening is far more precise. This stage begins when the mind realizes it cannot save you. Not with knowledge, not with insight, not with understanding. The structures you relied on, beliefs, narratives, goals, begin to dissolve. And for the first time, you are left without a map. This is the phase many mistake for depression, failure, or regression. But it's not a descent into darkness. It's a stripping away of illusions. The world doesn't disappear. Your filters do. You wake up and wonder why you're doing what you're doing. You question roles you once inhabited automatically. Even simple actions feel strange, as if you're watching yourself perform them. Who am I without striving? Who am I without meaning? Who am I when nothing feels certain? These questions don't come with answers. They linger. Emotionally, this stage can feel heavy. There may be sadness without a clear cause, fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, a sense of isolation even when others are near. But the loneliness isn't because you are alone, it's because the version of you that related to the world is dissolving. And here's the crucial truth most people never hear. This stage is not here to destroy you, it's here to remove what you are not. All your life you've built yourself out of borrowed ideas, expectations, roles, beliefs, ambitions. This phase peels those layers away, slowly, relentlessly, without asking permission, and the instinct is to resist, to fix, to escape, to return to how things were. But that's the one thing that no longer works, because once awareness reaches this depth, going backward is impossible. The only way out is through. This is where surrender stops being a concept and becomes a necessity. Not surrender as weakness, but surrender as honesty. Honesty about not knowing. Honesty about not being in control. Honesty about allowing the process to unfold without forcing meaning onto it. And something unexpected happens when you stop fighting. The silence stops feeling empty. It becomes spacious. Moments arise where you're simply present, not searching, not analyzing, not becoming, just aware. And in those moments, something subtle stabilizes. Not joy, not certainty, groundedness. You begin to notice that beneath all the noise, beneath thoughts, emotions, identities, there is something steady, unmoved by confusion, unaffected by collapse. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand belief. It simply remains. This is not an awakening moment. It's a remembering, a recognition that what you were trying to reach was never missing, only obscured. From here, life doesn't suddenly become easy, but it becomes clear. You still experience difficulty, but without the same internal resistance. You still face uncertainty, but without panic. You stop demanding meaning from every moment, and paradoxically, meaning begins to show itself naturally, not as explanations, as alignment. Your actions slow. Your choices become simpler. Your attention sharpens. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone of anything. You don't chase validation for insight. You don't feel superior to those who haven't questioned their lives. You understand them. Because you remember how heavy it feels to live unconsciously. This is where integration begins. Not as a role, not as a mission, but as presence. You don't separate life into spiritual and ordinary anymore. Everything becomes part of the same field of awareness. Work, rest, conversation, silence. Nothing needs to be escaped. Nothing needs to be exaggerated. And service, real service, emerges naturally, not as saving others, but as clarity in how you show up. You listen more than you speak. You respond instead of react. Your presence steadies rooms without effort. You stop trying to become someone meaningful, and in doing so, you become real. This is the quiet paradox of the journey. You searched for yourself everywhere, only to discover you were never lost. You were just identified with noise. This doesn't make you special. It makes you honest, and honesty changes everything. If this series reflected something you've been living, but never had words for, leave a comment. Not to explain, not to perform insight, just to acknowledge that you're here, aware and listening. Because sometimes that's where the real journey begins.